ladies and gents. Welcome to another Thursday live interview this week. I'm going to be bringing on experts David and Gissele Taraba, and we're going to be talking about an inward journey to invigorating your work life. Very, very interesting stuff. I know a lot of us often face multiple different challenges in our work life environment, and sometimes it can be really hard to sift our way through. So I'm going to be bringing them in. They're going to be teaching us a new spin on compassion, on consciousness, on awareness, and how that specifically shows up in the work life. So I'm going to get them to come in. Gissele and David, I just have them waiting over here for me. You guys can hop on into Instagram right now, and we'll bring you on live. It's going to be exciting. Very, very interesting stuff that they have to share with us today. So without further ado, let's have them join the call. Going live over here. Beautiful, beautiful. Should be coming in with us any moment now. As I'm just not seeing you with us in the call, but it says you've joined.
Yes.
So there we go. Now we can turn the sound off on our computers. Beautiful. And we're going to go live. I'm not seeing you. I'm not sure why I'm not seeing you on Instagram, though. Can you see me?
I can see you. We can see you.
You can see me, and for whatever reason, I can't see you guys. If you're out there in the audience and you can see them, guys, if you can say something. Amazing. I see you. Beautiful. Amazing, amazing. So we're going to go live right now at the same time on Facebook. Very excited to have you guys here with me. For whatever reason, I'm like, there we go. Amazing, amazing. Okay, so we are going live. Hi, David and Gissele. We are a bit delayed over here, but I'm trusting you'll come back to us.
Hi, Giovanna.
For those of you out in the audience, if you can give us a big thumbs up as well, if you are hearing this, amazing. There we go. You guys are with me now. So we're officially going live now on Instagram and on Facebook at the same time. Very excited to have you both with us here today, with all of us here today. And we are going to talk about an inward journey to reinvigorate your work life. So like I was saying earlier, you know, there's a lot of complications, a lot of issues that often do come up in the workplace environment. Oftentimes it's a challenge for us to really sift through them and know how to deal with these issues. And I know that David and Gissele really do offer a spin on what is compassion and what is consciousness and awareness in these environments and how to work through it. So I'm going to do a little introduction of who these two incredible experts are sitting in front of me. I just want to say thank you so much, both of you, for being here with me today. It's a pleasure.
Thank you for having us. It's great.
Absolutely wonderful. So all of you, stay tuned. Also, I want to say this. Stay tuned right up till the very end, because David and Gissele are going to be offering us, they're going to be walking us through an actual practical exercise. So you want to stay right to the very end to learn how to integrate this exercise into your daily life. So without further ado, Gissele Taraba, well, both of them, I should say, are the co-owners of the Maitri Centre for Love and Compassion. Gissele Taraba has 2 masters, one in epidemiology, another in social work. She has worked in the not-for-profit field in leadership for over 14 years, is a mother of 2 beautiful children, very nice. She's a trained counselor. She's also a trained mindfulness self-compassion teacher. And under her leadership, she's successfully taken teams that were considered dysfunctional and assisted them to becoming flourishing and compassionate teams. David, her loving husband, has a bachelor's in biological science, a GITH certificate on the higher self, is a practitioner of the healing arts, and is a student of mastering alchemy. He's also, of course, a proud father and a husband. He has over 23 years of experience, quite a bit, in the manufacturing field as a manager and an entrepreneur. He has gained experience and wisdom on his journey to sovereignty. I love this term that David uses, making him a valuable teacher and a supporter in transformational learning. And so the two of them are co-owners of the Maitri Centre for Love and Compassion. This is the very reason I have them on with me today, to really show us an alternative way of looking at and addressing compassion and, of course, consciousness. And they offer one-on-one sessions, workshops to individuals. They also work with businesses to increase the amount of compassion in the work life. And their ideal client is an organizational leader or someone from HR. So without further ado, I'm going to let them take it over for us. And I would love to hear your story, Gissele and David. What led you both to where you are today?
Why don't you start off?
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Am I good? Can you hear me, Giovanna?
Yeah, I'm hearing you beautifully.
Oh,
yeah, I'm hearing you.
Yeah. So I didn't always think I was going to be doing this journey, to be honest. I actually always dreamt of working within the child protection system. And I actually got the chance to do that, both as a manager and as a director. And what I found was an environment that was not really enabling people to flourish. There was issues at times.
Mm-hmm.
I was really
Yeah.
self to a more loving and compassionate one. And so as I started undertaking this journey through obviously my inward journey, as well as my support from my partner, I really discovered my ability to heal myself from the anxiety, from the panic attacks. I felt a level of freedom and a level of empowerment that I hadn't ever felt before. I was able to give myself that which I was seeking from other people. And from that point, I was able to really, truly feel free. And then I started reflecting and saying to myself, why aren't we doing this in workplaces? Why aren't we doing this in systems like the child protection system and the youth justice system? Why aren't we taking this in environments and reminding people of their ability to heal? And so I think from that perspective, I thought I really, really want to embark this, because I really hadn't seen a lot of conversations about compassion in the workplace. Like you said in your introduction, I mean, I'm going to confess, I have been both a power over boss as well as a compassionate leader, and compassion works 100% of the time. I had teams that I had taken that everyone had labeled the worst in the company. And by the end of my leadership, by the time I had left, they were really, really flourishing teams. And that is kind of the power of compassion. So that's really kind of what led me to the journey in more or less a few words.
Incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So my story, let's see, in a nutshell, I grew up, not knowing this back then, but as I kind of went down the road for my awakening, I grew up wanting to fit in. I came into this life, I had this kind of instinct that I always want to fit in. I always wanted to be part of the herd, part of the collective, you know, that whole, it was really, really a focus of my anxiety in my earlier life. Aware of a lot of things. I had an inherent awareness of knowing ideas. I came in with wisdom without sounding egotistical, that helped me in that journey and really kind of staved off a full-on mental breakdown, which was a good thing, right? But when as I got a little bit older, I kind of pushed that aside, and really focused on this idea of that I had to be quote unquote normal and part of a workforce and doing all that day-to-day stuff and providing and, you know, getting something for something and all those old stereotypical ideas that I was one of many that bought into. And then finally there was a reckoning when, I guess it was when my first child was born, our first child rather. It was like a light went off and I said, no, there's no more with this, because it was filled where I worked. It was a wonderful place. It was lucrative. It was fruitful, but it was also full of false promises. It was full of, there was a lot of untruths. There wasn't much compassion in the works because it just wasn't there in those times. This is like, you know, almost 20 years ago now. And that led me down this, it opened a door when I saw I've never talked, I never really brought this up. When I saw my daughter, that I decided to allow that side of me to come through again.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, good
for you. Good for you. It's amazing.
Oh my God.
These are the best interviews, David. These are the best interviews.
So from that moment on, my extra strategy was from work, and I became an entrepreneur because I decided I can't work for anybody else. And so I established my own business, and it's been wonderful, but also this journey of awakening and and that is really, really taken hold. And that's my main focus is expect this to be emotional for me. Okay.
It's good.
So in having all these experiences, I've been able to gain going in this inner journey, which we're all about, is all about, we're going to talk about that. But this allowed me to understand things and bring compassion into myself, which is wonderful, obviously, very healing. And I see the world in that light. So it pushed me, it kind of let me go back into the healing arts, so to speak, and counseling. I don't have the wonderful credentials that my wife has, but it still has, I still really have a lot. I've had a wonderful experience allowing myself to give back to others. So when Gissele, I wanted to do this, what we're doing now, years ago, but it just the timing wasn't right. And then when Gissele had, a couple of years ago, had her epiphany herself, this next awakening that I don't want to do what I do anymore, it kind of like, awesome, let's go down this road of seeing how we can facilitate and help others on their journey for awakening and finding their inner guidance and bringing compassion and self-love into their day-to-day experiences. Because, in all honesty, most of us work for somebody else. So we're playing that game of going outside of ourselves for energy, right? You go outside of yourselves for money. You do all this wonderful stuff where you think you have to bring it in. And why not do that through a compassionate lens? Why not do that through self-love? Why not do that through all those things that we feel is really will add to that experience. So sorry if I went off.
No, it was amazing. And I just wanted to yes, and I also think it's pretty incredible that both you and Gissele have sort of gone through this. You've taken your own paths, but it's led you very much in the same direction of emphasizing the importance of compassion and love and doing that inward journey, and then having that show up in the workplace, because you've both experienced your own ways of perhaps not seeing compassion really show up in the workplace, or how much more fulfilling work could feel if or empowering you could feel if these elements were included in our day-to-day workplace. So I think it's incredible. Both of you have had your own journeys, your own stories, but they've sort of led you both down the same path together as a couple to work together to share this message. I think that's very, very powerful. Now I want to ask you both. I know you say you have a spin on what compassion is. So if you could first share what compassion in a general whole or general sense really means to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, compassion really is a witnessing of all things without judgment. And that can be a little bit tricky for people. So it's a witnessing of all things without judgment and a desire to understand as well as support all things. And so what that really reflects on is really reflecting on just the desire to understand with a sense of curiosity, with a sense of without preconceived notions and assumptions. Because I know in the workplace, we make a lot of assumptions.
Yeah. And just to add to that, we've found out, or we've experienced compassion from other realms or other areas in our experiences. And they seem to always be tied with some judgment. I know we don't want to admit it, but we do judge most everything in our day-to-day life, right? If you're in duality, you're judging something. Like it's just, that's how it is. You're judging something if it's light or dark. You're judging everything. So that some of it is necessary, obviously, to navigate your way through your day-to-day experience. But compassion is something that it's beyond duality. So it's beyond judgment. And as the journey to understanding one's compassion, you have to understand and be willing to undertake this desire to release judgment to the best of your ability and really kind of see yourself, how you're judging, where you judge, and how that's really impacting your experience from day to day. So it's not an easy thing to endeavor to really kind of understand and go into living through a compassionate lens. And that's why I know that we're a little bit different than the status quo on compassion. But if you listen to the words when people speak, quote unquote, compassionately, it's very, very subjective in whether or not and that's not for everybody. I'm not going to say there's not compassionate people out there, but a lot of the times we feel we're doing compassionate things. I caught myself many times saying, I'm super compassionate in this scenario, but really there's a lot of judgment in what I'm thinking right now about whatever the situation is. So that's why we're kind of really have an emphasis on working the non-judgment piece in the compassionate experience, right?
And the key aspect on the judgment piece is that, to be honest, all of our experiences, especially in the workplace, are based on our perception, are based on our experience of what we think is occurring. And so it's possible for David and I to experience the same event and for us to walk away with completely different experiences and completely different truths.
Perceptions of it.
And I think that is really challenging for people. But in my journey, especially within compassion within the workplace, I really had to kind of begin with my understanding and my perception of what I was experiencing in order for me to be able to then act compassionately towards others.
Yeah.
A lot of what you're saying, sort of cut in, David, hold the thought. It was something I learned many, many years ago. Somebody used the term filters, and it just seemed like it hit me so clearly. We all have our own filters, or, you could say we all have our own shade of glasses on the way that we look at the world. And I think once we start to realize, okay, of course there is the thing happening outside of us, but actually everybody's perspective on it is very, very different. I think the moment we recognize that, we can really start to understand, or at least aim to understand, and start asking questions. And like you guys said earlier, get curious as to what it is that's going on. What does their filter look like? That way then we can understand and build a greater sense of compassion. Because if I don't know what your filter looks like, then it's much harder to understand, but also to believe that you're seeing it so differently than I'm seeing it.
Yeah. And one other thing regarding our view on this in the workplace is that the judgment aspect we judge based on our historical, on our memories, on our historical events. So judgments only happen when we bring a past experience into that developing of that current experience, and then we base it on those, what you said, those filters. Well, work as a system is set up to build today based on yesterday's or based on some future desire, right? That's what drives the marketplace, right? You take what you're either working on or was working on yesterday, or what you learned, and you're going to bring that to project you in the future. So it's inherently very deceiving, and how much judgment we have to bring, or we unknowingly bring into our work environment, right? And judgment is very different than discerning something, right? So there's a very fine line there that I think it's clouded. That's what we try to help clarify and maybe shed new energy on.
And if you were to tell us the difference between discernment and judgment, what would it be? I mean, I know we're going deeper down a rabbit hole, but I would like to hear maybe in a few simple terms what that really would look like to you.
Well, when you discern something, okay, so there's reaction and response. So judgment and all those very edgy emotions that we drag out of us, those all come from reaction. So in most of our day, we're in reaction, right? You're in, I got to get this done. What's the next thing that's coming to me? And you don't really have time to take a breath, or we're not really taught to take a breath and then assess the situation and then make a response. And so that would be the discerning process. You're discerning, you're taking that moment and you're deciding in real time. You're not allowing yourself to be sucked into a reaction, because reactions happen through the subconscious. They just happen, and then before we even are aware of what we're doing, we've already reacted to a situation, right? Like I found myself when employees have come to me, and not so much now, but in my past experiences, when they come to me and would ask me for something, then I would say, no, we can't do that. Well, it got to a point where I would ask myself, why am I saying no? Because that's a pretty good idea. But my reaction was to automatically say no, because I heard no a gazillion times throughout my life.
Interesting.
So that was it. But then as I started to find my way to discern input, discern situations, and make that discerning decision, it became more of this response where I was able to assess what was bringing to me, and then maybe make the best or the most optimal choice at that moment is the discernment.
Yeah. And if I could share an example, a lot of policies and procedures tend to be more fear-based than discerning, if you can actually believe it. So for example, let's say people are working and they have like a lunchroom, and somebody does something in the lunchroom, right? So they'll go rifling through like people's lockers or whatever. And obviously they get disciplined. They're one of like hundreds of staff. But then the company makes a policy where nobody can be in the lunchroom by themselves without anyone. So now you have punished the rest of the people for the actions of one person. And what you've done is you've constricted the culture, and now you have stopped trusting the majority of the people because of the actions of one person. And rather than deal with that one person, a lot of businesses make these blanket policies out of fear that somebody will step out of line, but not acknowledging all of the other people that are doing the things that would be commonly expected. And they don't realize that these policies, once they start to constrict, then they start making people feel like it's not a compassionate workplace. So that there's a stark difference between policies that are based on fear and policies that are based on discernment.
I think that's a very good point, Gissele. And I think the example is very, very important, because you're right. And often that's what happens, I think, when we're dealing with numbers and large groups. And it's just, in some ways, the company feels that it's easier to deal with everyone as a number, as opposed to really going that one layer deeper and looking at the individual and seeing what took place on that individual level. Now, I know that we talked previously about compassion. You guys shared your overall concept of compassion. Is there a difference between that versus self-compassion?
That's funny.
We always have this kind of discussion.
Go ahead.
there is no difference between compassion for others. Compassion is for the self is really just compassion turned inward, right? And in order for us to have like that kind of definition that we gave of compassion without judgment, you really have to give compassion to the self. Everything really starts and ends with ourself. So our self-compassion really is a willingness to look at ourselves and look at all of our limits and our flaws and the way we treat ourselves, and to treat ourselves with kindness, with patience, with forgiveness, with love, and to be able to do that where we embody that for ourselves, and then are able to give to people from our overflow, not from our reserves, because we tend to give to people when we don't want to, and there's where the kind of constriction happens. And so from our perspective, all compassion really is self-compassion, because in order to give to other, we have to give to ourselves. Is that?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah, can I add something
Yeah, of
to
course.
it? I always like to add.
It's nice. It's nice.
So the idea of self-compassion versus compassion for others is, again, we're taught to see it's part of a larger conversation, because everything starts from within, like Gissele was saying. So it's impossible for me to truly show somebody compassion unless I have compassion for myself. And so I before I really got into this, I was more of, I witnessed myself looking at people and then saying to myself, well, I have compassion for them. But my actions for myself in the same situation would be different. So how can I truly be seeing the world through a compassionate eye if I'm not showing myself compassion? So I believe that the world around us is based on a perceived experience. So the more we get balance within ourselves, and the more we heal within ourselves, and the more we show ourselves all the things Gissele said, nurtures that compassionate view about ourselves, our experience then gets outpictured, and the reflection that we witness, which is our day-to-day life, is one that is perceived through a compassionate eye. So it's not so much the act that I have to go out there and be compassionate to somebody, but if I truly love myself, which is a very challenging thing to really, really, really mean, even to truly like oneself, that's showing inherently a lot of compassion. Because, like I said before, compassion is beyond duality. So it can't be really qualified. It's hard to qualify it in the terms that we kind of are commonplace here, because they usually come with some form of, preconceived some agenda, because we all have our own little kind of shade in this duality, which is the physical reality, right? So it's a challenge. It's different for everybody, and it's a life journey. You just continue to do it until it becomes that knowing, and that's just how you live, and then you're going to be just seeing and living a compassionate life, which is
please go ahead, Gissele.
I was just going to share a workplace example of how that kind of played out for me, because sometimes it can be challenging to understand. So I was having a really challenging time with a colleague of mine. Anything that I had said or any email that I had said, she would immediately escalate and respond in a way that made me feel really frustrated. I used to get triggered, the more she reacted, the more I reacted, and we sort of escalated. I had tried to talk to her, and it really just kind of did not go very well at all. And so, I got to the point where I was like, I can't keep escalating anymore. I can't keep, because this is not working. I'm talking to her, it's not working, I'm going. And so what I decided to do is I asked myself, okay, what can I control in this moment? And really the only thing that I can control was my own reaction. And so I decided to, like we said, take a journey inward and really ask myself, okay, so notwithstanding what she's doing, why am I reacting to her reactions? What is happening for me? And when I really asked myself what was going on for me, I really realized that whenever she reacted, because I felt I was trying to be helpful when I had sent these emails to her, I felt like I was not being valued. And so I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel like my contribution was important. And it actually kind of had to do with a lot with the fact that I was new in leadership at that moment. And so what I did is I asked myself what I needed in the moment, and I basically said to myself, okay, I need to feel valued. And so what I did was give that to myself. I said, you know, I reminded myself of all the good things and how I had gotten to leadership and all the good things that I had done. And so that actually enabled me to kind of soften around the emotions that I was feeling whenever she would respond. And it really allowed me to so once I got curious about myself, I was then able to get curious about the other person. I started to wonder about this other person and wonder about why they were responding. And I actually chose to see this person or reimagine them as a compassionate person. So my default setting became, I'm going to choose to believe that this person is a compassionate person, and that I'm going to get curious as to why this person is reacting the way that they are. And I'm really going to approach my relationship with her from trying to clarify the information I'm providing, as well as get curious about the responses. And what I realized was when I actually shifted my perception and my behavior, the person shifted as well. But at least from my perspective, the behavior changed. We were able to then engage in better dialogue. I was able to better understand that this person was also just as worried and anxious about what was going on at the agency at the time. And then our relationship really was able to flourish from there. And so I don't think if I was able to step back and give that to myself and really wonder about myself and my own perceptions for what was happening with me, I wouldn't have been able to get curious about the other person.
I honestly, just how you're giving like stellar examples, like practical everyday life examples. They're really great. And I think it's very valid. And I continue to say this, and it sounds so, we could say cheesy or, you know, repetitive sometimes, but I really do believe it starts with ourselves. Everything starts with understanding self. And exactly going back to what David said earlier, the moment we actually pause and we ask ourselves and we start to, we take more of a responsive versus reactive approach and discern, right? Discern what's going on versus reacting. Then, like you said, we can actually get curious. But I think on a very even unspoken, it's a nonverbal level of communication, energetically, you feel different, and I also think the other person feels different. Even in the way you're communicating, like you said, it changes, and that energetic exchange between the two of you entirely starts to shift too. And then, of course, then the verbal communication shows up as well as differently. So, these are very, very powerful examples. It, like I said, it does sound sort of cheesy. Okay, self-love, compassion, we need to find it first in ourselves. But really, that's what it is. When we are in a very, I would say, peaceful place within, and like you said, a very curious place. I really love the concept of curiosity. I teach a lot about curiosity because I do think it's very important. Then we can also have compassion for other people. And I also think we start to wonder as well, even about other people's lives. You know, what's going on in their world that's leading them to be responding the way they are, because there may be so much outside of the realm of what we can see that we're not understanding that's happening in their life, right?
For sure.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
So I want to go even more direct. I want to hone in even more and address, what would you guys say are some of the top issues that take place in the workplace, and what is it that happens? What is this inward journey that we need to start shifting or seeing differently or healing in order to address those issues in the workplace?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of the things that I saw within the workplaces that I worked at were issues of bullying and harassment. There was obviously racial issues of equity and race. There was something that I called the kind of hierarchy of compassion. And it's sort of interesting to observe it in that I think one of the reasons why people have a challenging time being compassionate towards others is because internally they feel like they don't have enough resources, or they're worried, they're afraid that they're going to be made a chump. Somebody's going to take advantage of them. Somebody's going to, and so that fear really prevents them to act compassionately. And so this hierarchy of compassion is really about people talking about deservedness and talking about this person deserves compassion because they're a good person. Whereas that person, once they have made a mistake in the workplace, they're labeled something specific. That person carries that label throughout their whole, it doesn't matter what they could have done like 10 things right and then one thing, they're labeled as such, and then they carry that label around with them, and people only see them with that lens. And so it is really, really challenging then for people to exercise compassion, because they default to that one experience where the person maybe didn't act compassionately, or they did something that they shouldn't, that people think that they shouldn't have. And so
just that form of, well, quote unquote form of compassion isn't compassion, because it's based on judgments. It's purely based on judgments. So how is there's
right, but people perceive themselves,
I know, it's
because that is that's the conversation that we have all the time as well, because from David's perspective it's not compassion, but the rhetoric people use is one of like, I'm a compassionate person, I'm being a compassionate person to this other person, I'm being a compassionate person to people that deserve it. And so when we start talking about deservedness, I think we have shifted away from the concept of compassion, because compassion, as Pima Chodron says, is among equals. When I see my own flaws in my own humanity, I'm able to sit with you and see your humanity and not judge you on a scale and just say this is part of the human experience. So that's one of the things that we have seen. I know that the bullying piece for sure is one. There's also a level, and you had mentioned this, Giovanna, too. There's a level of complacency, and there's kind of like not a willingness to kind of address some of these issues, and that's based on fear. I know one of the things that David and I talk about that I've heard him say is, he talks about that. I think the reason why Brené Brown resonates so much is because she talks about vulnerability, and a lot of people feel very vulnerable at work. They feel really, really vulnerable. They feel like they're at risk. It's not safe. They don't feel free. I remember staff have said to me that, they didn't feel free to speak up about things because of a fear of repercussion. And so it's that feeling of vulnerability that really keeps people kind of wanting to kind of keep the status quo. But the status quo is really what's hurting us. And so how compassion approaches, like through compassionate communication, help us lean into one another. And really it starts with us giving ourselves what we need.
Yeah, just can I add something to that?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. So the vulnerability is a interesting subject, and it's also one of our greatest tools to allow yourself to be vulnerable, right? To be safe within yourself enough to be vulnerable.
Yes.
And so the idea of not being vulnerable at work, well, that is, feeds in, or it kind of alludes to the bigger system issues, which are, every type of fear which you bring into your workplace. And there's also that desire to be accepted, which I'm very familiar with. So like today, I was very vulnerable, which I wasn't planning on allowing myself to be. Did I feel uncomfortable being vulnerable? Absolutely. Do I feel ashamed that I was vulnerable? Absolutely not. Because that was something that came from a place that I don't even know where it came from. It was obviously so far down in my subconscious that it just showed up 25 years later. But I'm able to be vulnerable to myself now. I'm able to allow that to come out in me. And that's through the idea and understanding and really kind of working on this whole compassion idea, this lived experience that we talk about. And that's why we choose to bring that into the workplace, because we have all these wonderful examples of, what Gissele was talking about, of the ideas that create those toxic environments or those uncomfortable places that we work at. Like a lot of people dread going to work, but they go to work out of the fear of losing their job, not having a paycheck, losing their house, losing their whatever, blah, 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 family, that's their car and all that wonderful stuff. But truth be told, they're just perpetuating those uncomfortableness by not addressing themselves, because it all comes from themselves. So, and there's more that we can go into today, but the idea of that acceptance piece, if you look back on our everybody's journey, I'm sure can reflect back on their work career so far. and think of a time when they either did it themselves or they witnessed somebody else not speaking a truth or their truth at that time because they were afraid that they would be looked at funny or be thrown out of the circle or be thrown out of the job or be something, have some negative recourse for saying, you know, we shouldn't do it this way, or you know, just stepping into a level of their authority, right? So that's where that's what we bring to the table. We kind of bring those we want to raise those challenging questions and have people look into themselves and understand that, you know what, my day-to-day life comes from me. It's not given to me from them. I may interact and go to work because I enjoy it, and I was passionate at this at one point, or I am in certain areas, but I really want to develop and get that back, right? That's why we talk about reinvigorating this. We want to get that back, and the only way you can do that in this climate, in this world that we live in right now, is to start living from within. And you know, all those things that we've been taught that media has told us for our lifetimes and generations, you know, you got to put the other person first. Everything you do for yourself is selfish, or you're greedy, or you're this, or you're that. Like, we've had a lot of really messaging that is be detrimental. I don't want to get really
that has not served our highest self. Of course. So I know you talked, David and Gissele, I know you mentioned, you know, it's about going on this inward journey and, you know, diving deeper. And for those people that are listening in right now that say, okay, yeah, this is very much my experience. I'm not satisfied going to work, or I'm uncomfortable in these situations, or I want to speak up, or I want to ask the question, or I want to offer my opinion, but there's fear or whatever may be coming up in the workplace environment that makes them feel uncomfortable or uncertain about themselves. I know we said, okay, we want to have this self-love, this compassion, this understanding, and go on this inward journey. Now, I want to go that one step deeper. What does this inward journey really look like? What would you guys suggest is the first steps that someone listening in would need to take, or you would recommend that they take to really start to understand self, so that they can show up at work feeling that much more empowered?
Well, I'll just touch on it. It's going to be a little bit different for everybody because that's the reason we exist as many people instead of one, because everybody's here to have that little bit of a different experience than the next person. So what it looked like for me to begin with, well, I think maybe there are some similarities, and it's more of, I think it becomes with curiosity. So it's all, so the journey that we go down is one of potentials. It's opening up to new potentials. And in order to open up to new potentials, which allows new experiences to come through, it has to start by question. You have to, and nobody can, I can tell you what I think you need 1,000 times, but until you, in your perceived reality, make these kind of clicking, you know, put these thoughts together to say, this is what I need. And then you take ownership of that thought. It becomes yours. And then when you have the conversation, you come back to me and say, hey, you know what, David? I just thought about this. And I'm thinking to myself, well, you and I have had this conversation about 100 times. But you've taken ownership of it, and now you're curious, and now you're on your journey. So it's an awakening that cannot be taught. It really can't. And unfortunately, if it could, we'd all be awoken. We'd all be enlightened beings, and Earth would be a very different looking experience. We're getting there. So I would say curiosity, allowing yourself to be curious about yourself, and not about other people, but it's that old experience where you got to get to know yourself, and we really focus so much attention on that outside experience and helping other people and saving other people. The reason we do that is so we don't have to look at ourselves, because it can be very uncomfortable, right? Like, it took me a while to be able to truly, genuinely stand in front of a mirror and say that I like myself. Like, I really like you. That's a challenge, but it all started I guess I came into this world, like I said earlier, I was open in ways that I was working on shutting down, repressing, because I was trying to fit in. I was just trying to be a part of. But so I don't know if maybe Gissele has a better answer for that, because I think it was always there with me. I'm sure there's lots of people like that who were kind of like, I feel different, so I got to fit in, and
of course, I think that applies to many people. Gissele, I want to hear what you have to say. I just want to quickly ask David, though, was there an aha moment when you looked in the mirror and finally said, okay, like bam, I like myself? Or was it progressive over time that you were building up this self-liking into self-love? Like, what made you finally realize, wow, I fully, entirely accept my being?
Well, it came through, it came from various avenues. So I was doing a lot of self-learning, self-remembering, however you want to look at it. And so it was kind of, it wasn't like a big aha moment, like, oh, the heavens opened up and the light shines down and I'm like, God, you're really a good person. No, it wasn't like that. It was just, it kind of, I softened to myself, and the walls that I put up for my journey, which I didn't even realize were there until you look at them. You know, you look back on your life. It got to that part where it turned from a mental, for me, mentally looking at myself, because we judge ourselves, to a feeling I felt as I was looking at myself. So that for me was the shift. I got out of the mind and I went into the feeling of the experience of looking at yourself and being with yourself and sitting with yourself. And that for me was the big, that
was the moment.
For me, I was lying in bed and I remember thinking to myself, I'm worthy. I'm worthy. And then I was like, what? Like, where did this come from?
You weren't asked, but thank you.
Now I want to hear it. Tell us, Gissele. I want to hear it.
Enough about you. What about me?
So for me, my journey really was around the giving myself what I needed in the moment. I was so often looking and giving my power away to other people. You know, if my husband loves me and thinks I'm attractive, I'm lovable. If I have lots of friends who care about me, I'm lovable. And then when I realized I could give it to myself, when I realized I could give myself that nurturance, I could tell myself that I'm worthy, I could tell myself that I'm lovable. And the more that I did that, I had to kind of reprogram my brain, because my brain was like, the default setting was, what's the worst case scenario? And then go 2 steps lower. I had to really kind of shift my thinking to, you know, and when I started giving that to myself, I started to see everything that I'd ever wanted, like all of the things that I was seeking, it just flooded to me, but I didn't really need it anymore because I was already giving it to myself. And for me, mindfulness really helped, not living in the past or in some fearful future, really getting familiar with my thoughts, really becoming aware of my thoughts and what I was thinking and how I was hurting myself with my thoughts. Yes, I experienced the trauma, but I was re-traumatizing myself every time I thought a negative thought that I thought confirmed what happened to me. And so the mindfulness and meditation really helped kind of ground me that way. Giving myself what I needed in the moment was really important. And then the other thing that we kind of, I've been really kind of exploring, and I love exploring, is the reimagining. So when I started to reimagine my colleague, really, I opened up to different potentialities. Could I reimagine this situation in a different way? Could I reimagine it? And so and that opens up a whole bunch of other venues. It's almost like we start to look at things with a little tiny lens. And then we can, when we start to reimagine, we can kind of open up to those potentials. But for me, it really was about the thinking. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I love how you said that, reimagining, because in reimagining, we are capable of creating a new reality. And, you know, of course in the mind, but then that obviously has an impact on how we emotionally respond, how we energetically respond, and then obviously how we physically respond in our actions and our behavior. So I would like to ask, you know, you guys said it's really important, of course, to be curious, self-like, which then evolves into self-love, to be mindful. You mentioned meditation, to reimagine. You know, all these different pieces that are part of our inward journey. When we start to integrate these pieces into our lives, how does that then show up and change our work-life environment and relationships?
No, please.
I was just going to say that just because Gissele just gave that example of reimagining things and how it's just started to come back to her and she didn't even need it or feel she required it at that time, but it just showed up. That's how it works. Yeah. We don't truly create from the mind. Like we don't. We create from the knowingness, right? Which comes from here. It comes from who we really are in our core essence. And that's where the energy is aligned to, and that's the experience we have. So the ironic part is, like, just to build on that, it's when we learn to be complete, then all the things that we once felt we needed show up, but they show up for us there because that's us. It's a reflection of us, right? The lived experience, the perceived experience is merely a reflection of where you are at any moment and where your energies are aligning to give you that experience. So as one gets into themselves and one gets balanced within themselves, every part of their experience will change and become a little more harmonious, a little more in balance. Work is a very big one because people live to work a lot of the time. So that's why we're focused on work, because it's such a big part of people's lives. And then you have relationships and you have all those other things. Gissele?
Yeah, no, thank you, David. And that's really what it was for me in particular. Like how it showed up for myself was greater harmony at work, greater harmony. I didn't need people to act a specific way towards me. If they didn't value me, it didn't really kind of take anything away from me. I think some of this harmony between relationships is our desire for them to acknowledge that which we feel needs to be acknowledged within ourselves. And so it's that desire for somebody to validate me, that desire for somebody to love me. He has to love me so that I feel lovable. That person has to think that I'm smart in order for me to feel worthy. But really, once we realize that all of us, absolutely every single person on this call has the ability to give that to themselves and has that within them, that they're already whole and complete. You know, the work with us really is an unlearning. It's not a learning how to love yourself. It's an unlearning of all that garbage you learned from all the different. Because at the core, we're all loving and compassionate. At the core, we are all these amazing beings that our light has been dimmed. And really, we have to kind of get all the garbage out to really allow ourselves to flourish.
And it's just there.
I'm just like,
and it's just there. It's really about, you know, like allowing ourselves to be seen by ourselves. And so many times we don't even see ourselves. We don't. And for many times I was suffering and I was not even aware I was suffering. I was not, until a girlfriend said to me, like we were having lunch and she leaned in and said, "Why are you doing this to yourself?" And then she went back to eating lunch and I was like, "What? I'm doing this to myself?"
Yeah, like what am I doing?
So that's how
I'm the victim.
No, I'm the victim. That's right.
Well,
sorry, go ahead.
No, finish your thought. I want to add to what you're saying, Gissele. I'm just like, it's totally resonating.
So that's what I said when I started to be in harmony with myself, within people's disharmony, whether it happened or didn't happen, or whether people came at you, it doesn't rock you. You sort of like become like that tree that goes with the wind. You don't break. You just kind of, you understand that everybody's coming with their own issues, yourself included, and you get to the point where you understand everyone's doing the best they can with the understanding, knowledge, and awareness that they have. And that's one of my favorite quotes from Louise Hayes. But it's so true. I finally understood that where people are at, it's not because they're trying to hurt me in particular. It's just what they're carrying, right? So it does bring greater harmony to your relationships.
Yeah. And I remember hearing years ago somebody having mentioned, and I'm sorry, I don't know who it was, to quote you, but they said, if we knew better, we would do better. Yeah. And I really do believe there's a lot to be said about that. And that is our consciousness. I think we're all on a different spectrum of consciousness, of awareness. And, we're all learning at different speeds, and what we're learning obviously shows up differently in our own ways too. And our consciousness, or what we're seeing, is expanding constantly, which does come from things like, the inward journey and asking yourself questions and really diving in and trying to understand self. But where was I going with this thought?
Somewhere good.
Yes. So everything you said, that in gaining a greater sense of consciousness, we would we would make different choices, or we could use the term better choices, whatever that means, better compared to perhaps what we would have, it's something different than what we would have done, a day ago, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago in our lives. But the choices we make, I think, become that much more powerful, and they aid in, serving not only us, but all the people in our lives, all the relationships in our lives. Of course, when we're doing the inner work ourselves, just everything you said, Gissele, right there, like just snowball effect, one after another, entirely resonated, because it is so true. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, of course, we're talking more in the theory right now, right? This is all like consciously taking in concepts. So our conscious mind, our beta mind, is taking in concepts right now. And I think the moment we begin to actually integrate these concepts into our energetic body, then our whole being can entirely shift, and we will show up very differently at work. We will show up very differently in the relationships we have with our boss, co-workers, intimate partners, with our kids, like in every area of our life, really.
Can I just add something there?
Please, yeah.
I don't want to be a devil's advocate, maybe, or something.
Yeah.
I don't want to be.
Yeah, go for it. Love it, Jamie. Go for it.
I would say that it's how you said, bringing it into the mind and dissecting it. I think that's part of that's not a. You don't want to do that, because once it goes into the rational mind, and then you start to analyze it, and then it becomes part of this. It's all this yes or no, all these. It goes there. You're in the mind again. You're out of the feeling world, because you're in the mental scape. So where we're talking now, the true messaging that's coming through is beyond the words. It's the messaging. It's the energy. You know how you said things resonate with you? Well, that's beyond words. It's not the words that are spoken. It's the energy that's coming through. So the audience here and our little interaction here, what we're bringing to facilitate somebody to allow themselves in their own journey to have that aha moment you were talking about, just that little bit of awakening for themselves. That's the beauty of this kind of stuff. So not to discredit what you're saying, because I think it's great, but I worked very hard to get out of the mind.
So I'm glad you said this. No, I'm glad you said this, David, because maybe how I expressed it verbally was misinterpreted. We're on the same page. So I entirely agree with you. I think it needs to be understood beyond the mind, beyond the conscious. Yeah. It's like and there's no words to describe it, but I think it's very much like what Gissele said. You sort of just felt it. It was just this like very deep knowing. And I think that's the piece. Like when you really deeply feel within you that you just are worthy, that's the place we really want to get to. So thank you, David, for clarifying. Because you did, we're on the same page, So I know we're going over the 1 hour mark. We could keep going on this because it's such a fascinating subject. I want you guys to be able to share just a practical tool with us that we can integrate into our daily lives, to be able to put more of that, that compassion into our lives. And then we will wrap up, and you guys can share with us where people can hear from you and find your work.
So I'm just going to do a very quick kind of reflection, like after the day reflection, which you can do. You can also do it in real time. Like you can do it in the moment when you're actually having a challenge, and like give yourself. So this practice is about giving ourselves what we need in the moment, right? And so you can actually do it as a reflection after the day, or you can do it during the challenging moment.
A good place to start is when you're in bed, when you're just about to, journey into the netherworlds, and you just kind of go over and reflect upon your day, and just kind of, like she said, it's a reflection to just see how maybe I'm looking things, that day was, how much habit was that day versus how much me being present in that moment of the days. And so the reflection will allow one to open up to the idea of, because we're very habitual creatures, right? We do a tremendous amount of stuff out of habit. So this exercise is one that, yes, it will really benefit to bring into your daily life, but it's based on that kind of what is habit, and are those habits working for me? But you have to recognize, what am I doing habitually versus really making a conscious, discerning, choice to do those things. So
And also doing it at night gives you a sense of, you could reimagine your day as well. So that can feel very powerful. So hopefully nobody is driving while they're listening to this. Please do not drive.
Yeah.
Operate a motor vehicle. Or yes, you can do this with your eyes open or with your eyes closed. I want everyone to kind of take 3 deep breaths in and out. So we'll start with that. So take a big breath in and out. Breathe in and out. Breath in, final one. And out. And this is just to bring us into the present moment and enable us to get a little bit of distance from what happened today. So I want you to look back on your day, to reflect on your day. And I want you to look for one opportunity where you could have given yourself a little bit more compassion. So reflect on your day and think about one possible opportunity where you could have given yourself a little bit more kindness or a little bit more love. So think about what happened. What event happened today? Did somebody say something hurtful? Did maybe somebody cut you off in traffic? Or were you feeling not valued by someone? Or maybe not seen? So really get into the feelings, the emotion of what was happening for you. Now I want you to ask yourself, what did I need in this moment? Did I need a hug? Did I need to hear some soothing words? Did I need to feel like I was valued and seen and worthy? Now maybe some of you had a great day, which is wonderful. In that case, there's always an opportunity to give yourself more love and more attention. Now I want you to start saying to yourself the words that you needed to hear in that moment. You are valuable. You are lovable. You are worthy. Now, obviously, you can say it from the I am perspective. So, I am valuable. I am lovable. I am worthy. I am healthy. I am happy. I live with ease and grace. Now, with practice, you will start to feel your heart really relax when you hear the words. Sometimes it can feel a little bit challenging, if that's okay. If you're having a hard time saying that to yourself, that you're lovable or worthy, say to yourself that you're willing to be worthy, that you're willing to see yourself as somebody who has worth. I'm willing to feel worthy. I'm willing to feel lovable. That softens it up a little bit for you. Now, once you start to relax and ease into it, you can bring your attention back to the breath. Breathe 3 times in and out. And then you can open your eyes.
Come back into the room.
Yeah. And that's a very quick way that you can actually just kind of fill your cup at the end of the day, or you can do it in the moment. I've done it during really challenging times when I've had challenging conversations with people.
Right. But why we do this as a reflection is, well, amongst the reasons that, other than the reason that we said, at the end of the day, is that often, I know from experience that I'll often find myself going through my day, and then as I come back, there would be something that, once I started to wake up to things, I would notice that things would be nagging me, that I don't really understand why this is nagging me. And then as I went into the reflection of the day that occurred, and just go through the whole event of the day, getting up in the morning, having your breakfast, getting in your car, going to your thing, it kind of inherently will jump out. It will come to you as to what it was. And then meeting yourself in those moments and giving yourself what you didn't in those moments, you are doing it now because, well, time's an illusion, but that's something for something else. So you go into there and then you kind of set that intention, and that, to have a different experience in the next thing. So it's a really useful thing. Just don't do it when you're driving.
And for those of you who may have been driving, you can always listen to the replay and do it when you're not driving. Very soothing voice, Gissele. Thank you for that. It's very fascinating. I find, just as the exercise you walked us through right now, very similar to when I do meditations. Thoughts will come up, but also just feelings seem to present themselves out of nowhere. And like you said, David, it's not really out of nowhere when you really start to scan through the day, and then that it pops out and you really become more aware of where it came from. But it's interesting as things will come up, and then you say, oh wow, that was living inside of me. Okay. Yeah, and what I really loved about what you said, Gissele, is asking yourself what it is that you need and what you can offer to yourself in that moment. I think that's really powerful because, the first step is awareness, and often we get to that step, those of us that are doing reflective work, but then we don't go that one step deeper and say, okay, now that I'm aware, now what do I need? Mm-hmm. So I really liked that. I think that was very, very powerful. Simple, but very powerful. So thank you. I just want to thank both of you. I also want to just note and I want to say to both of you, and I also want to just make it clear to the audience watching as well, this is a very beautiful example of a powerful couple right here. And the fact that you two can work on a project together that you're very aligned with, I think that in and of itself is very, very powerful. I can see the love that you two share for each other, even in the way you communicate, and you hold space for each other as you're talking, and you're conscious that the other one is sharing and has, space as well to talk and share and express themselves. So I think this in and of itself, if nothing else, is a true testament and an example to when you do your inner work and when you really start to understand the self and you dive into that compassion, then your relationships will look as peaceful and powerful as this one does right in front of us. So thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
for being with us here today. If people want to know more about what you two are up to, the Maitri, am I saying this correctly, or Maitri?
It's Maitri.
Maitri, okay, so spelled Maitri, but it's the Maitri Centre. If you both want to know more about the Maitri Centre, then where can they find both you, David and Gissele?
So we have a website, www.maitricentre.com. We're also on all social media platforms. We have an Instagram account, so it's Maitri Centre 1, as well as a Facebook account. We're also on LinkedIn, so check us out. Thank you.
Brilliant. And I will put all this information for those of you that are also watching the replay right now. Once this goes up, I will put all the information in the comments below, so you don't have to go too far to find all of this. And like I said, it was a pleasure interviewing both of you. Such a pleasure. I learned so much. I'm sure lots of people that were a part of this and that will be watching afterwards will have learned a lot as well. And we may be doing a round 2 on time, because I loved what you mentioned, David. You're like, this concept of time is created. I was like, oh, that's an interesting subject. So stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen. We may be bringing you back to talk about time.
Sure.
And thank you again. Thank you again to both of you. Have a beautiful evening ahead to all of you in the world.
Bye for now. Bye, everyone.